by that time, if the fund was set up at that point, or but also the board made a certain commitment to making some money available for some programs and scholarship stuff and things like that. And of course, the task force was messy again, terrible memory for dates. I'm trying to remember when the task force had started, but it was around that time. It was probably 88 or 89, something like that. So that was, that was the focus of attention and work at that time. And then the other big memory for me about the San Francisco Convention in 1990 was Nelson Mandela coming to Oakland, and all of us going over and going to the Oakland Coliseum and hearing him speak. That was the biggest high imaginable. I mean, that was really great.
Were you ever involved in any of the task force?
Only peripherally. I mean, I was somewhat involved in the pre-task force, that when it was the group that formed out of our chapter here in San Francisco, involving Reggie Williams and Tom Horan and some others, and we were meeting in Reggie's living room, Reggie and Tim's living room, right around the corner from right here, and looking at and that was called the Task Force on AIDS Prevention or something, but it wasn't the national, it was just this chapter group. And we were looking at, it had a real specific focus. It wasn't about spreading HIV prevention messages. It was about, principally, it was about looking at ways to get the existing organizations that were doing that accountable to be doing that equally with people of color as with white people. And I remember out of that, Reggie got onto the board of the Shanti Project, and there were various sort of initiatives that came from that. And then the task force ultimately was, the national task force was formed, the grant put in, and money received to actually set up an organization that would be dealing specifically with men of color. And Steve Feebeck was very instrumental in getting that started with Reggie.
Speaking of Reggie and Tim living right around the corner from where we are now in your longtime home on Fell Street, we are also, are we not, just a half a block from the Casa Loma, where the first NABWP convention was held in 1981.
The historic Casa Loma Hotel, gay resort hotel, that was, when I first came to the neighborhood, when I moved to San Francisco in 82, I wasn't living here. I didn't move here into this house till 85, but I remember getting the Advocate, and the Advocate always had a big ad for the Casa Loma Resort Hotel, which was this gay resort hotel in San Francisco. And it would, yes, and when this is before my time, but when the first convention was held, it was, I understand, it held across the street at Sacred Heart Church in their church basement, and all the delegates and folks were put up in the Casa Loma, and that is right down in the corner, and just had a fire the other day. It ceased to be a gay hotel some years ago, and the bar, I guess it was called the Casa Loma Bar, was a gay bar at the time when I first moved into the neighborhood. Actually, it was still going, but it changed ownership, and the hotel became basically this sort of seedy residential hotel, which it still is to this day. And the bar was this scary youth culture kind of biker bar for a long, straight biker bar, or kind of people in the music scene and punks and stuff like that. It was kind of interesting. And then it closed, and really just hasn't, the bar itself hasn't been open for some years.
So there's no plaque there commemorating our first convention?
No, there's not. But, and also, it surprised me even when the Chronicle covered the fire just a couple of weeks ago, and the place didn't burn down, it just, they had a fire on the third floor, and they put it out, and I'm sure it'll end up being repaired. But the fire made the newspaper because it was a pretty big deal, and they closed off Bell Street for 2 hours or whatever on Sunday, and the reporting just said a building on Fell and Fillmore. It didn't even say the name of the hotel, and it gave no historical context, even to what it had been before. So time passes and people forget, which is why you're doing this, which is good. Even though I've already forgotten most of the stuff that I could have told you maybe 5 years ago.
Well, let's see, what other conventions did you attend after San Francisco? Want me to go through the years?
Yeah, because there's only a few.
Detroit in 91,
No, not Detroit.
Dallas in
Not
92,
Dallas.
Chicago 93.
Yes, I was in Chicago. My partner by then was Al Cunningham, who was from Chicago. We met at a BWMT function here in San Francisco. He had moved out from Washington, D.C. to work for the task force, actually, to work for Reggie. And we met at a picnic, a Labor Day BWMT picnic in San Francisco, over in Oakland, that the Bay Area chapter put on. And so we've been together for a couple of years by the time of the Chicago convention. And he was, as I said, from there, and he had actually gone back there for a month or two to do some research and some other work. So he had been there for a while that summer, and then I joined him back there, and we attended the convention together. I remember about that convention, again, it was in one of those wonderful down at heel old hotels downtown that we always seem to find. I have a lot of specific memories about that. There's some good workshop recollections. I remember meeting Ernest Height. He lives out here now, but he was still living in Chicago, and he gave an interesting workshop about some of the work that he was doing in the community and anti-racism issues and stuff. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention was over the course of a number of conventions was the black and white caucuses and my experience over time of the white caucus as being a place. That was something I really looked forward to after the first couple of conventions that I went to. I think an interesting part of the evolution or what was going on in society or whatever and reflected in the organization around a real coming to consciousness and empowerment of African American gay men, and the whole, kind of Marlon Riggs and Tongues Untied and this whole sort of movement, renaissance really, that was going on culturally. That was happening, and I think there was a certain degree of empowerment happening among African Americans in the organization too, to be empowered to be relating to each other in ways unmediated by white people, basically. I think in some people's experience, I think coming up and coming into maybe BWMT as black people was an experience of the way to come into the gay community required a lot of mediation with and by white people who controlled the institutions and all of this. And that there was something that happened with the coming together of African Americans even in this imperfect setting of BWMT that allowed bonds to be formed that maybe wouldn't have otherwise, and that there was a certain kind of empowerment going on, which I think some white people felt really threatened by, and was reflected in some ways in the white. So that the black and white caucus ideas, as I understood it, were times when, again, this dichotomy, and there were obviously non-white and non-black people involved too, but heavily black and white, where the two groups could come together as their own group and sort of share things that they might not be able to share with their partners or in other mixed settings. And I remember a perception among white people that the black caucus, they have all the fun and they're singing and it's loud and it's emotional, and here are all these uptight white men together who just don't even really know how to talk to each other. And I think that in my first experience of that was the Atlanta Convention. It did feel that way. There was this real kind of awkwardness, and I think over time, my experience of it, if there's any kind of evolutionary feel that I have or progression, among those different conventions was that each year the White Caucus was a better and better experience for me, in the sense that it felt like people were, to the extent that it was the same people coming back. I mean, there was always new people, but where there was continuity of the group, there was a feeling of more comfort at being with one another and being able to, I don't know, it just sounds really corny, but just getting more comfortable with who we were, and in relation to that organization, and in relation to the people that we were relating to intimately of a different race. It was a good. I think we became a more kind of cohesive group in a way too. It was really positive. So I've lost my train of thought of what I was talking about before.
You were in Chicago.
Chicago.
Anything else you remember about Chicago?
No, I can't remember what brought that to mind in terms of Chicago. I don't remember the caucus specifically.
What about, let's see, the following year was in D.C.?
That's it.
And then, my goodness, what year?
You have them written down.
No, let's see, 90, God, I'm blanking now, 95, what was 95? 96 was Cleveland, 97 was Charlotte.
God, I think Charlotte was probably the next one I went to. I definitely didn't go to Cleveland. That's all right.
I'm not being interviewed. I'll think of it in a minute.
That's right.
What do you remember about
You don't
Charlotte?
expect me to remember you.
Oh, Key West. Key West.
Didn't go to Key West. I actually haven't been to a single one in Florida, and there's been a lot of them. So that's a lot. Not that I'm not boycotting Florida. I just didn't end up making those.
So you were in Charlotte in 97.
Yeah, and then probably the next one after that was San Francisco in 2000. So that's really about it for me. But Charlotte. It was, by that time, you know, this was like a reunion thing for me. It was like, even Chicago was almost a little like that. Oh, that was still pretty early. But by this time, it was really kind of catching up with people that I hadn't seen for, you know, a while, that I would tend to only see at convention. And, you know, I remember driving to Asheville or whatever there was this, you know, trip to the
Biltmore?
the Biltmore estate, which we didn't go on the bus. We went and we had a rented car, and we took some people in the car, and had a really nice day. But it's almost like at that, I don't know, at that one I remember just, it was just kind of catching up with people and spending time, and so I don't have a real firm memory of, because at that point I wasn't involved in the business really at all. And was just kind of feeling like, you know, again, getting to see a place I'd never been. You know, they got us out to some clubs and stuff for like the talent show and things, and these really kind of little out of the way places, and it was fun.
What did you think of the San Francisco convention last year? It was the third one we've had here.
And the second one I had been to.
And this one was not sponsored by the chapter. It was
Right.
Because the chapter isn't affiliated with the NA anymore.
Right, I know, unfortunately.
Do you have any feelings about that?
I think it's unfortunate, but it's that thing where I feel like it's hard for me to really criticize, because I haven't been active in the chapter to say, no, this is a bad idea or whatever. I mean, I know that Jim Ivory put up the money, actually wrote the check to reaffiliate the chapter with the NA, because he thought that was important, but the chapter said, well, we're not going to have anything to do with it. I mean, the chapter being a few people on the local board, which is down to only a few people at this point. I mean, it's unfortunate.
Do you know what the issues are?
I think the initial issue was the folks who aren't even the co-chairs now, because they've kind of moved on, but just had a big issue with a lot of things, but this perception that, you know, the Nationals, you know, taking our money but isn't speaking for us, and I don't know, it's just that I've just always had trouble with the thing of like, you know, that's just the male slat, criticizing things from the sidelines or whatever, or looking at something like a national organization, which is just made up of you and me folks, but looking at it as like something out there which is unaccountable to us or whatever. It's like anybody can be a part of that, and it's, I don't know. So I just didn't have a whole lot of patience with that. But I know there was a specific issue that those co-chairs had with the whole black and white caucus idea, for example. And that's something, that's a historical thread that's gone through the organization, but they, kind of took it to the place of picketing them or trying to disrupt them or something like that. I wasn't that.
How do you understand that issue? I mean, how would you frame that issue?
That it's, I mean, it'll, anything I say is going to be an unfair characterization probably.
Well, it's your characterization. It's your interview.
That we should be transcending race. I mean, I remember the old argument about the black and white caucuses was, well, I'm in black and white men together because we're black and white together, and we shouldn't ever be separated. That's not what they were saying. They were saying, in my understanding, it's more like, it was more of a sort of a postmodern critique or something, sort of saying, well, no, we're past that, we're transcending these barriers, and that anything that is like reinforcing or reinstituting them is sort of backwards, and that we should be creating this new day where we're all, where these things aren't important. I'm not sure. I can't really put it in words because I don't have a firm grasp of what the idea was, but it was important enough to them that they felt like this was just a sign of how caught in old thinking the National is. Those people are, or whatever. So.
Well, how has being a member of this organization, locally or nationally, changed your life? How has it affected you?
I think probably two ways. One is and the principal one is the people that the friendships that I've formed. And the other is giving me a place, giving me a way to work on issues of racism. And I mean, probably most recently, the thing that I've done with Black and White Men Together was going to, this was a year ago, but was going to the workshop by the Discrimination and, Multiracial, Multicultural Institute, MRMCI, yes. Finding the I in Racism, which they just did again a couple of weeks ago. But Al and I went to the one that was held a year ago in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. And that to me, that feels like that's a real service. It felt to me like this is something the organization is doing that is really, in its way, cutting edge, and also is really speaking to a need, and that it's something that we all need to always be looking at, which is, owning our part in understanding and owning our part in, the sort of racist structures that constitute our society in a lot of ways, and how can we, work with that and deal with that and resist that, and but be conscious above all things. And a lot of those conversations I probably would not be able to have or have had I not been involved in the organization. Now, I'm certainly not, I probably don't carry that enough outside into other things that I do, as I might, or as much as I might. But that's my problem. That's my fault, and the organization has really, provided a place for thinking about and learning about those issues.
This may be redundant, but how do you think that being a white man has specifically affected your experience in this organization? I think your experience is different
well, again, to grossly generalize, I guess. Well, no, for me as a white person. I mean, I think it's some of what I said. I think it's, and and white people do this all the time. It's like, oh, it's about my learning experience, or it's about, it's such a good opportunity for me to understand my, place and how I'm part of this, dominant and oppressive culture. But I think for all the guilt tripping, I think it's very important that we figure that out, and that we figure out our how to understand and challenge some of the privilege and some of the entitlement that we come into some of these situations with. I mean, it's either we get our eyes opened or we don't, and it's better to get our eyes opened. And I think that, again, my experience in SteveM3 has been, to have that opportunity. And I feel like I'm the benefactor of a great amount of forbearance on the part of my brothers who are not white, who have allowed that space to exist, I think. And certainly people of color in the organization are getting out of it what they get out of it too, but I think it's a unique opportunity, I think, for a white person to have a certain kind of entree and acceptance into this other community that we might not otherwise be able to relate to in that way. I don't know, I'm not putting it very well, but...
Well, how have you, this is a very broad question, but how have you seen AIDS affect this organization?
I think it's devastated it, just like it's devastated a lot of other institutions in the gay community. I mean, we can't know what would have happened, but for, or whatever, but certainly to me a lot of, and it's a two-edged thing. I mean, there was, you have the task force, and you have a lot of people coming into and being empowered to do certain kinds of work that might not have, opportunities that might not have existed. So I don't mean to say that it's this unmitigatedly negative thing, but overall, yeah, the epidemic has really, decimated our ranks in a way. I mean, I remember, the first March on Washington, where the quilt, when we, as a chapter, we got together and did. Actually, that was an early task force effort, I think, before that was what, 87, before the National Task Force had actually been founded, but I think I remember Reggie and some others of us who went down to the Names Project and created these very simple quilt panels of a half and half black and white, and then the name across, stenciled name across of the person that had died, and then the chapter. So they were from all over the country. And it was a very bold thing, and so you could actually see on one of the aerial photos or something of the quilt, there was a big area that was these black and white squares. Anyway, just the sheer number of people on the these memorial services that we have now every year, where it's just a huge number of people just gone. And I think it's both, their individual talents and everything gone, but also just this feeling of this sapping of, energy. And I don't know, I guess I said earlier about sort of turning inward or whatever. I think, again, I don't know if that had anything to do with my, my sort of, drawing away with being really actively involved in the organization, just because there, have been other things that I've gotten involved with or whatever. But there's certainly a sense of less of a pool of, active participating folks. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, there's, like I said, it's also in some ways created opportunities for people to do really meaningful work that, I think redounded to the credit in some ways of the organization.
How have you seen, if you have, race relations change since you've been in the organization,
Mhm.
both within and without the organization?
Well, I think in my really clumsy way, I was trying to say a little earlier about my sense of the actually sort of empowering experience that BWMT provided for some people of color. I think the sort of interracial taboo kind of thing, I mean, it's amazing to me to even think that in 1980, you know, that was like a big deal. But I think in some ways, culturally, it's become enough less of a big deal that in some ways it's like society sort of, you know, passed us by in a way. I mean, I think there's less of a felt need on the part of people who are maybe coming together across racial lines for a club, basically. And because I remember this feeling, and maybe it was just the enthusiasm of having just gotten involved, but in the early 80s, being involved in BWMT, and when you would like see a black and white gay couple somewhere, it was like you wanted to go out and like recruit them. Or if when we were, or we would always march in the parade, you know, the Lesbian Gay Freedom Day parade. And first of all, I mean, wonderful feeling because you get all this great applause and stuff, you know, coming down the street. And we probably, you know, everybody did, so it's not like we were unique, but that's a very gratifying feeling. And then you'd like see, you know, an interracial couple and sort of like, oh, come join us, and certainly not that everybody who was, you know, in interracial relationships was like flocking to BWMT, but there was more of a feeling of like it was a real vital kind of thing that was really speaking to a situation that people were in that really could benefit from some real solidarity and stuff. Whereas now it does feel as though that's less of a big deal, you know, which is, and great, that's good, except that there's still like heavy-duty racism in society, so it's not, you know, the problem's not fixed. So it's a dilemma because there's still a real role for education and for solidarity and kind of, you know, bringing people together around these issues.
Well, what do you think is this organization's, and now I mean the National's, greatest accomplishment, if you can pick one or more than one?
Kind of the most visible was the task force, of course, but in some ways that didn't feel like an accomplishment of the National Association. We were kind of a vehicle that allowed the people who got that started to have a sort of an institutional home, but it kind of feels like of national significance. That's kind of like the thing that sticks out for me. And maybe more subtly, you know, to the extent that, because I know that, you know, chapters are having trouble and faltering, or, you know, around the country for a lot of the reasons that we've been talking about, I guess. But to the extent that the National was able to, that the existence of the National could be of assistance and provide support to efforts that groups were undertaking around the country, and kind of the extent to which it was a little bit of a clearinghouse, has been a little bit of a clearinghouse for information and ideas. I mean, I think that's of significance, though it maybe wasn't really visible at the time.
What do you like best about this organization?